his argument? What is he saying? I know many of you wrote really excellent reaction papers, so I know you've read it. Then I think it would be useful to sort of unpack step by step his argument, because it's a bit of a complicated argument, right? So let's work on this one together. So let's start step by step. What is Mitchell arguing? Sort of in general. How does he start? Let's do it step by step, sort of unpack his argument here. Yeah.
Well, basically that the world is kind of looking at Egypt from the wrong perspective,
Which is
that all the problems are just that overpopulation and not enough land. Because of that, there's not enough food, and it causes all these other problems when they're not looking at the real causes.
Which is what?
Like kind of wealth disparity, dependency on foreign nations.
Something like imbalance between the agricultural resources and population.
So, but what does he say about, so let's start with, that's exactly right. So he's saying that Egypt's underdevelopment, right? Let's sort of go back to the language that we've been using, right? Egypt's underdevelopment, the reason why Egypt is supposedly underdeveloped, according to USAID, World Bank, right? The reason there is this problem is because of population growth, because of land issues, right? There's only this one narrow strip of fertile agricultural land, and so there just isn't enough food that can be produced out of that one place for this growing population, right? So he reads, and I think you have this highlighted. You want to read it, the USAID description?
Egypt depends.
Yeah.
Egypt depends on the fruits of the narrow ribbon of cultivated land adjacent to the Nile, which delivers rich and shade goods. For more than 5,000 years, agriculture has sustained Egypt during the first half of the century. However, the growth of agriculture failed to keep up with the needs of the population, which doubled, then nearly tripled. It is a matter of single arrangement.
Right. So here, according to the World Bank, USAID, this is the problem. You have the narrow, and it makes sense, right? It's nature, and I think that's what he's saying. The problem, underdevelopment, is being represented as a problem of nature. That you have this tiny strip of land, and you have too many people. It's a problem of simple arithmetic. If you could increase the fertile land, then you would be able to feed this massive growing population. And so it's the role of development agencies to make Egypt developed, to figure out a way to circumvent that problem, or create more arable land. Those are your two problems. Those are the two issues. And when that becomes the solution, or the sort of view of what the problem is, what does he say about the various solutions that are proposed? And so he makes a second, he presents this, and then he has this argument about sort of objects like things becoming objects of a problem. And so when, he has a theoretical argument saying, okay, when something gets designated as a problem, right, and that problem takes on this kind of natural, it seems to be something that is natural, a natural problem, a problem of nature, then it seems, perfectly reasonable to have certain kinds of solutions. And so then he begins by unpacking the supposedly natural problem, the supposed problem of nature. Right? So he starts off by saying, this is the image. And it becomes an external problem. And so he steps back and says, okay, let's unpack the supposed problem. So, but he says, the interesting part that I think is really important, on top of page 19 on the left, the more natural the object appears, the less obvious this discursive construction will be. What is he talking about? What does this mean? Let me repeat that. At the top of page 19, the more natural the object appears, the less obvious this discursive construction will be. Well, the question is, what is this discursive construction? But what is he talking about in general? The more natural the object appears, the less obvious this discursive construction will be. Karen, what this means?
I guess more natural to the problem, the fact that it's a problem for
well, the solutions seem very clear, right? The solutions are, you just handle those natural problems, right? So I don't know if it's the solution that's less obvious. So what is the discursive, what does he mean by discursive construction? What is he pointing to?
I guess he's talking about the argument about how Egypt is in a certain state because of all these underlying problems, but those problems that they're stating are not really backed up, they're not really looked into as anything. So I guess that's what's kind of the more natural object appears when you look at what's actually happening. And that's obvious discursive construction, so that means the more, I guess, unrealistic than like what those people are saying about Egypt, which is not true.
Well, what is a discursive construction? What does that mean? Let's start there. What is a discursive construction?
Is it an idea someone constructed? In my comment, he said it's not that rough, it's constructed, so it's kind of just made up.
Well, right, so that basically he's saying that every narrative, so every account of something, newspaper account, anthropological account, historical account, maybe whatever it is, has to be narrated in a certain way. You have to describe, right? You use words to think about a particular issue, right? Now, in doing that, when you're doing that, whether it's in a newspaper article, reporting something true, an anthropological piece also describing something true, or fiction, describing something that's fantasy, right? All of that requires the process of writing and narrativizing, right? Of creating a story about something. Now, whether it is in a newspaper article or poetry. Is everyone following? Or whether it's a political problem or an economic problem. There is a narrative that comes to describe whatever it is. Is everyone following? And in doing that, as soon as we use language, as soon as we sort of articulate or represent an issue, however true we feel it is, that narrative makes us see that issue or problem in a particular way. It focuses our attention on the matter with a particular perspective. So in other words, no account is without the mediation of the narrative through which that thing is being described. Right? So you describe the chair. The chair is here. Right? We all sit down and try to describe this chair in the room. Chances are, some of us will have very similar descriptions. Some of us will have very different descriptions, just of this chair in the room. Okay? And each of those narratives that describe that chair will draw the other person's attention to that chair in a particular way. Is everyone following? So in all forms, it's a construction, not because it's not necessarily true, but because as soon as we narrativize or use language to describe it, it constructs this in a particular form. Is everyone following? So he's not really saying in this sentence that, it's necessarily false, right? What he's saying is that all narratives about something, about objects, whether, the chair or an event or in a novel, will project a particular perspective or particular perspectives and focus our, is everyone following that? Okay. So, but he's arguing that the more natural the object, the chair, the more natural it is, the harder it is, or the less obvious it is that description is a construction. If I were describing the fiction of the chair, like some, fantasy about the chair, not this chair, but some relationship to the chair and a story then you're more likely to pay attention to the way I write that thing to understand that it's constructed, that it's not real. Is everyone following what he's saying? Okay. So that's all he's saying there. And then the discursive construction is that, all accounts in being discourse, right, are necessarily, he's suggesting, and people argue that this is a huge debate in literary theory, a huge debate in politics, and are made. Right? They are created. And as such, they, we recognize they're created with the fact that they're created, and we pay attention to how they're created. And so what he's doing is a classic approach called deconstruction, right? He's deconstructing the construction of the object of Egypt's underdevelopment. It appears so natural, and he's saying, okay, let's take it apart. Let's look at the language that's being used, and let's look at the assumptions claimed in that language. Is that clear? Questions about this? Okay. So the description, right, so then he continues. The description that invariably begins studies of Egypt's economic development constructs its object in two respects, right? In the first place, the topographic image of the river, the desert surrounding it, and the population jammed within its banks defines the object to be analyzed in terms of the tangible limits of nature. So here he's saying the object, the problem of development, is constructed as a problem of nature. If you already, that's what we've been talking about, but he's trying to unpack that assumption. Physical space and human reproduction. These apparently natural boundaries shape the kinds of solutions that will follow. So as soon as you have these supposedly, these natural problems, limits of space, reproduction, tangible limits of nature, right? So what are the solutions? Improved management of resources, right? So that's the problem, these problems in nature, then here are the solutions. Improved management of resources, right? So we don't have that many resources, so what we need to do as a solution is improve the management of it. Makes sense, makes perfect sense, right? What else? And technology to overcome their natural limits. So if there's only a certain amount of arable land, let's use technology to expand it, or have that land be able to produce more. Okay. Yet the apparent naturalness of this imagery is misleading. The assumptions and figures on which it is based can be examined and reinterpreted to reveal a very different picture. The limits of this alternative picture are not those of geography and nature, but as you've all been pointing out, of powerlessness and social inequality. That's the problem, right? So again, if you go back to the language of modernization theory and dependency theory. Modernization theory says we have the problems of attitude, of values. So here is a solution of attitude, that is management. The problem is people are not managing their resources properly, efficiently, in the best way. So the modernization theory approach would be to say, their problem is that they don't have enough resources to cope with their expanding population. So we have to change the attitudes, so either reduce population growth, right? So you have major, family planning initiatives to control population growth. The attitude of management of resources better, right? So that's what is happening. And he's saying, like the dependency theory model, that's not the problem. The problem is you have inequality structured into the system, and that's what you need to pay attention to. And that's why there's this underdevelopment, right? Okay. The solutions that follow are not just technological and managerial, and they're also in terms of social values, right? Introducing the right management. The idea is that they don't manage well. What we need to get in there are management companies, right? McKinsey. Now, if we get McKinsey into Egypt, which they do, then McKinsey, everyone knows what McKinsey is, right? McKinsey, there are a whole series of international management companies, right? McKinsey being one of the most famous. You make lots of money, you work for them, it's great. I have plenty of friends, colleagues who work for McKinsey. Well, what their job is to increase the efficiency of management, right? So Queens College can hire McKinsey to tell Queens College how to manage the Queens College better, because Queens College has a hard time managing itself. So you hire an outside firm and say, okay, tell us what to do. And usually what they do is they say, okay, you need to cut this staff, you need to cut that staff, you need to merge this, department with this department. You don't have whatever, human resources here and payroll there, you put them together. And if you do that, what happens? People lose jobs because you merge them. Everyone's the same with. Okay, so these are called management companies. McKinsey's one of the most famous. It's a great job. But this is what they do, right? And so it would be a matter of, hiring management companies to come into Egypt and say, you need to manage your resources better. Yeah.
It's like advising firm. They advise people. Isn't it like that?
Yes, right.
Okay.
So they advise companies how to be more efficient. Because a company says, like in college, we don't have enough money to run our college well. and we can't figure out internally how to do it, and we want an outside person to tell us what to do, because if we do it internally, there's going to be lots of fights. So it's much easier if we have an outside person. Do you know what I'm following? So Queen's College hires McKinsey. McKinsey comes in, looks at the finances, looks at all the departments, and says, okay, this is where you can cut, this is where you can cut, this is, you should, and you arrange. And that's what they're saying for Egypt. The problem is the resources aren't being managed well. You need management to reconfigure the relationships. Okay. And then there's a technological problem because there's enough land. We need to bring in fertilizer or whatever to create more sort of chemical fertilizers to increase the production of herbal. Okay. So the solutions that follow are not just technological and managerial, but social and political, right? But if you look at it the other way, then the problems are not that, right? They're not these managerial technological problems, but they're social political problems. To tackle that is much harder, right? Let's say the inequality at Queen's College, McKinsey isn't going to come in and say, you know, the president, the provost, all the top of, you know, there's an inequality between the administrative staff and the grounds people, so let's cut the administration. Right? I'm not going to say that, they're hired by the administration. Right? What they're going to say is let's cut, you know, all these other departments. So there is the inequality, they're not going to get rid of the inequality. In the second place, the naturalness of the topographic image sets up the object of development as just that, an object, out there, not part of the study, but external to it. The discourse of international development constitutes itself in this way as an expertise and intelligence that stands completely apart from the country and people it describes. Much of this intelligence is generated inside organizations such as the World Bank and USAID, which play powerful economic and political roles within countries like Egypt. International development has a special need to overlook this internal involvement in the places and problems it analyzes, and to present itself instead as an external intelligence. That's what I'm saying, is that, like McKinsey, has to be seen outside, right? To help manage the interior, but they're often, you know, involved anyway. And to present itself as external intelligence stands outside the object. It describes the geographical realism with which Egypt is so often introduced, helps establish this deceptively simple relation. Okay, so everyone, so now let's unpack the presumption that one, there are too many people. What does he say about that? Overpopulation. Yeah.
One other thing he says that the Nile Delta is overpopulated. It's like 50 some million, more than Bangladesh and Indonesia. So that's basically create a food shortage. Number one. Number two, it's too much job, and they cannot hire so much people. So this is
Okay, that's the image.
Yeah.
Right, but there's population that is overpopulated. But what does he say about what's wrong with this number? Why doesn't it quite ring true? Yeah.
When you say you have to compare it to other countries that have better production, I think that's similar as well as the land.
So when you do an actual comparison with other comparable situations, it doesn't seem overpopulated. Right? That somehow the comparison is wrong. The comparison sounds like it's a huge amount, but in fact, if you do a more accurate comparison, so it says, so on the contrary, the Egyptians make very modest demands on the world's resources compared with inhabitants of Western Europe, Japan, and North America. So the population is big, but individuals don't make as many demands on resources as people in Japan, the United States, and in Western Europe. So yeah, you have a large population, but they might not have as many demands on the resources. Is everyone following? So, you can't compare, the numbers don't, right? An American makes huge demands on natural resources. You know, car, water, consumer goods, and just stuff, right? I mean, if you even think, and he's interested in food, the kinds of resources that people demand. So what is he focused on? What kind of consumption, resource consumption, is he, like, does he take up? Meat, right? Meat consumption. I mean, it's an enormous amount. I mean, not everyone, of course, eats a huge amount of meat, but compared to the rest of the world, Americans on average eat an enormous amount of meat, right? And that has all these other ripple effects. And so a person in Egypt hasn't historically, of course, and like now there's a huge push to eat meat, right? And what does that do? Okay, so let's continue. So and one American is more expensive in energy terms than a dozen Egyptians. So in terms of like, you have 12 Egyptians consuming energy, right, using up world resources to one American. So yeah, you could have 12, like the numbers aren't honest, by themselves don't really tell you resource consumption. It means the relationship of the resource consumption to the population, not just population itself. Okay. What about the question of not enough food? So that, he says, okay, that explanation, that natural explanation of too many people for the land doesn't quite make sense because it's not the number of people in itself that's the problem. What about the question of not enough food? How does he unpack and reconstruct that? And this is where he talks about the kinds of, right? So he says, but before accepting this conclusion, we should reach once again to the calculator. Between 1965 and 80, according to the World Bank tables, the population of Egypt grew at an annual rate of 2.2%. Yet during the same period, the World Bank also showed agricultural production grew at an even faster rate of 2.7%. Yeah.
Well, I read the section. What I thought was that they have enough resources to accommodate people, but it's just that it's the waste distributed that's not balanced.
Exactly. So it's not a problem of potential production. It's a problem of distribution, right? And that's, it's not, so it's not really that there isn't enough food. It's one, what's being produced, right? But also the fact that what's being produced isn't distributed evenly. So there are two problems. Okay. So then this is where the question to meat, the issue of the conversion to meat consumption comes in, right? That people feel like there's pressure to eat meat. There is a sense that having meat is a reflection on prosperity. Right? So an association, a social association of meat with wealth, or meat with economic stability. Is everyone? And that is in the US too. Like the idea, it's changing. It's changing, but there was a lot of pressure in the 1950s and 60s to increase meat consumption in the US. I don't know if everyone sees this like triangles, right? There's like food chart things. There's always like this meat there. Meat is hugely important. I'm not a vegetarian. I was, but I'm not saying this because I have like a problem with meat. believe me, it's okay, right? But we just need to recognize that the proportion of meat consumption is a historical development. It doesn't, people from the beginning of time, no matter what we think of like hunting and gatherers, were really gatherers. Like, hunting was not, was a small proportion of consumption.
I mean,
Yeah, what did you
I
think of
took
it?
a class on immigration recently, but it talked a lot about Americans. We read a lot about Americans, how a lot of people came to America, and it was like this. Were shocked by how much meat was here. It almost became like the American way. They didn't have meat in their old countries, and they came here and became this kind of.
Social value.
Yeah, of American. So it's kind of interesting that American organizations are coming in and encouraging other places to do kind of instill.
Right, exactly. So that's really interesting. I mean, that makes sense, right? Even if you're smiling, I can be why are you smiling?
In my country, it's a little different. I'm from Poland, and meat is like an everyday basis.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, it's nothing different here other than the fast food change, just like a junk food.
Uh-huh.
Like it's not real meat or anything like that, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And just to hear that people are shocked,
Right.
it's just different. It's for me, it's a shock to hear like somebody else's opinion like that. It's something different.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that that's true. They're definitely,
I'm not laughing. I don't want that to be like that. I'm laughing at somebody's thing. It's just I'm just thinking, and I just haven't heard that.
Yeah. We're gonna.
Oh, well, I was gonna say too. Was like the things we were reading were from like 100 different traditions. So it's like, I'm sure it's just kind of
Yeah. Well, but I think what you're pointing to is clearly there are, globally, there are places where meat consumption has been historically incredibly central to the diet. Poland is a perfect example. My sister-in-law is Polish. We went to Poland, and I was like, I can't believe how much you're like eating all day, all the time. But there's
It's like for lunch we give up meat on Fridays and basically
there's nothing to eat.
for that one day of the week everybody's starving. I'm like it's only one day. Nobody can figure out what to eat. They're all starving.
Right.
One day.
Right. But I think it's incredibly unique, right? I mean, I don't think in the vast majority of the world, in most places, that level of meat consumption isn't so common, right? But in Poland, there's a lot of meat.
There is like so many other countries where they substituted with like soups, rice, all of that. And it's just interesting to hear somebody else's opinion where it's the first time I've heard of that. It's not so common.
Right. So we're understanding then that once we have this natural object, and he's sort of deconstructing it and saying, okay, no, it's not a problem of population, and it's not necessarily, a problem of not having enough food, but it is the kind of food, right, that's being encouraged. It's about how distribution is managed, not necessarily production. Okay, so what does he say then? There are a couple, points to ask. What are the effects, sort of the political effects of focusing on underdevelopment as a natural problem? What does he say about that? This is a really important argument that I want to make sure we pay attention to. So, if the problem of underdevelopment is a problem of nature, it is clearly not a problem, supposedly, of inequality or some other social issue. It's a problem with nature. Then the solutions, of course, are managerial and technological. But it also means that our attention to a problem of underdevelopment becomes what he calls depoliticized. Development, right? So development discourse he's arguing is a discourse of depoliticization. It takes away the politics out of inequality. Is everyone following? And that's what he's saying is happening. So, because once you pay attention to the problem of underdevelopment, poverty, as a political problem, and an economic problem is related to the politics, then the politics enters the solution. And here he's saying development discourse, because of things like this, basically depoliticize inequality and underdevelopment. If you say instead, Egypt, there is this intense inequality in Egypt, there's poverty in Egypt, there's hunger in Egypt, Egypt is not as wealthy as it could be or should be, and the problem is the elite classes are siphoning off the wealth, right? Then what happens? Then you have a revolution. Then you have people saying, oh, it's a political problem. But development discourse has often made it, or has made it, at least the way he's analyzing it, made it a problem of nature. So that you manage it in terms of managerially or technological. So this is the sort of underlying argument that this development discourse is a depoliticizing discourse. It takes out politics of inequality. What do you make of the kind of sort of economic aid, the subsidized deception? Where does he say this? What he talks about, like how does Egypt then enter the sort of cycle of becoming part of the American economic system? What happens? So, how does the U.S. then help Egypt become more developed? Besides providing technological support, right? So you provide technological support in the guise of, agricultural experts, right? You provide managerial support in the guise of management companies, right? To go to villages and say, okay, you as a village organize your water distribution this way, right? Form councils, do X, Y, and Z, let's do that. So those are, two different things you can do. But the U.S. and the World Bank, and it's not just the others, get involved in trying to help economically too. How do they help economically? Remember?
Don't they provide loans?
Right. Yeah, but in what sense? Do you remember? How do the loans work? What are the loans for? Remember?
There are loans to buy trade.
Exactly. Right. So can you repeat that? So what are the loans? So Egypt doesn't have enough money. Let's say. So you need more food. Egypt, or you need more cows to feed your population, because of course the population needs meat. Egypt says, but we don't have enough money to buy the meat or the grain. We don't have cows, and we don't have grain for the cows. So what does the U.S. do to help? Yeah,
Well, they give them loans to buy.
U.S. grain,
Yeah, U.S. grain.
right? So then the U.S. gives Egypt money to buy U.S. grain. So what does this do? This helps the U.S. grain industry. This is all an attempt to subsidize the U.S. farming industry. Right? Instead of giving, Congress gives direct subsidies to industrial agriculture in the Midwest, but they also subsidize it secondarily by giving loans to countries to buy U.S. grain, to support food consumption that people don't have a tradition of having. Everyone's thinking of this cycle. And it works similarly for, in aerospace. So the U.S. gives loans to Egypt, Israel, even other countries, and says, you need more military defense. And they're like, well, where are we going to get military defense? Well, we can give you. No, we don't have money. Okay, we'll give you money to buy our military defense. Is everyone following? So then the country says, okay, now I can go to Lockheed Martin or Raytheon, right, Boeing, and buy our F-14s or F-16s or, okay. But they get it from the U.S. to go into those. Everyone is understanding the cycle. Not to make sure, it's not all conspiracy, but this is how development agencies feed into the U.S. economy and how they get funding from Congress. To say, okay, well, Congress will support this because it will support the constituents in my so it's not, the U.S. isn't just giving money away to Egypt. Is everyone following? Because your constituency is going to say, why are we paying Egypt? Why are we giving Egypt all this money? And the congressperson is going to say, well, we're giving Egypt this money, so that will then pay for the farm in Iowa. So let's give Egypt the money because then they'll get to you. Or let's go to, San Diego aerospace industry. Right? So that's, okay. Are there questions about how this sort of development cycle, is it thoroughly depressing to you? Are you surprised? Is it something that you sort of understood? What do you think of this? Yeah.
When you said the surprise, I talked about that earlier, like the 50 million population live in Nile Delta.
Yeah.
Is it true or is it fake? Yeah.
No, the numbers are not,
Because the population is this, like 80 million?
The population, the numbers themselves, what he's saying is the numbers themselves aren't fake, right? It's what the numbers mean, or what they're presumed to mean, right? So when it's just a matter of numbers, yeah, it looks
way too much.
But he's saying that's not the problem, because right? Yeah, but what do you think of this piece? Was it disturbing? Was it you took it for granted? Yeah.
Well, I really like this piece.
Yeah.
It just opened my eyes to a lot of things.
Yeah.
I was shocked by it makes sense. A lot of people walk around complaining about foreign aid and stuff, and it's so interesting to see that the U.S. isn't just giving away money for charity. It's not about that. It's about
subsidizing the U.S. economy.
And it's scary too, just thinking about if it all goes wrong.
In what sense? What do you mean?
If all of a sudden no country can pay back their loans, and the U.S. is giving out all these loans to buy things from the U.S. If it all went wrong, it can destroy U.S. industry as well as other industries. Probably create war.
Right, so there's more and more dependency, right? So the U.S. economy is dependent on the Egyptian economy which is dependent on the US, right? To give out the loans, to then buy, so the US economy, I mean, that's why when the US banks collapse, the world, like what's gonna happen, right? Because everyone's dependent on that, we're all dependent on each other. But I mean, it's unequal ways. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, no, I feel like I have to say.
Yeah.
No, I remember reading an article in the New York Times, and it's probably a couple months ago, about the U.S. giving money to foreign banks as well. So I don't remember what country, Switzerland or something, and realizing that how integrated this world system is, that it's very scary that if one country fails, it can affect every other country.
Right. Yeah. Okay. What do you, I can see if there's.
I mean, I wasn't really so surprised about this because, like, I'm taking a lot of classes that kind of just like deal with like how like corrupt and like devious the American government is. I'm like, oh, like this is just like another example to add to the list.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean to, I mean, I don't want that to be the message,
No.
right? I don't think people are in, I mean, I think some people are, right? There's probably, you know, there are some people who are saying, like, let's figure out this, I can like, follow the money, and let's get that money funneled back here or there. But I think in general, I mean, a lot of people, you know, it makes sense. There's a problem with irrigation, there's a problem with water, there's a problem with population, and let's figure out the best way to help. Right? So I don't think that everyone involved in this is by any means devious and pardon?
With the big picture, like.
Yeah. Yeah, or that, you know, it has these effects, or it's part of this structure that is recreating these inequalities instead of making them better. But then the other question is, how do you attend to, what is the other option? Right, if you were to start unpacking the political centralization and unpacking these political distribution problems, what would happen? Well, I think not just corruption, and you have political instability. Right? The corruption, you sort of let the corruption be for the sake of political stability. And otherwise, once you start saying, you know, where is this money going? Let's have it distributed more equally. Then the whole system can be unraveled from within. And you have, you know, and that's what's happening. That's what's happening in Egypt now. There's a lot of political instability. And you have a situation, yeah.
I was just going to say, it reminds me of colonization.
Yeah, how?
It's like a mother nation supposedly trying to this baby nation, trying to make it, you know, grow up and be developed and whatnot, but you're making this country dependent on you so that
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people have compared this development relationship as precisely that, imperial colonialism. That it's sort of the replacement of colonialism in the 21st century. But now we don't have colonialism, you know, political rule, but you have this kind of economic dependency that is akin to this. I mean, I think that's an apt yet also simplified. You know, it's a complicated set of relationships because colonialism, I mean, who is benefiting from the cycle of loans is not direct, right? It's not like, so who's benefiting from this? Who's benefiting the most from this war? What? But who in the US? Are you? The government? Really? Who? The farmers. Right? So it's private industry. I mean, it's not, you're paying a tax system, right? You pay your income taxes, let's say, right? The income taxes go to what? go to services, right, that you require necessarily, schools, now healthcare finally, military, police, fire, roads, social services, like public needs, right? But they also go to subsidizing private industry or supporting private industry. So the idea that private industry, the laissez-faire, is on its own isn't really on its own. It's being subsidized through these other channels. Is everyone following? So this image of like capitalism as private industry, best unregulated market, it's not regulated per se, but it's getting subsidies from the state through this other means. Is everyone? And that's where taxes go. In addition, is to support these industries. And the idea that if these industries do well, then there will be more jobs, right? And then there will be more happy citizens and comfortable citizens in the US. Is everyone following? No. Yes, you are, but you're.
I don't know, it just seems so. I don't know. There's always like, it's not really the citizens benefiting per se, because like, there are a lot of tax cuts. The middle class ends up paying all the taxes. They don't pay the taxes, plus they get the subsidies. And then they bank a lot of the money and it doesn't go back into the economy. So that's where it's like getting trapped.
Yeah.
I was gonna say it's completely different.
Yeah.
In terms of like the article and how it ended, I wasn't really surprised
Uh-huh.
when I read about this article. It was kind of reminding me of this class I was in African school course.
Uh-huh.
There's like this whole discussion on the concept of aid, giving aid, whether or not recently new countries should be dependent on aid. Does aid create dependence, or is it just a country that's looking to themselves? Why is aid good, why is aid bad, etc. And it's like what she said is basically like communism, a continuation of, to me at least, like it seems like a continuation of these nations getting the upper hand in terms of like getting advantage on these nations have more natural resources basically as themselves. So I don't think it was like surprising in any way, but it was just nice that I really believe that all set up the argument and just break it down.
Yeah.
And just statistics and stuff. So I really like that.
Yeah. Kind of,
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just, you don't really have certain resources and then you see the diamond drop and the people there try to help them out. So it kind of keeps a lot of things.
Right, I think in this context, right, so I think that you're talking, there are different kinds of economic relationships, right? Where there are resources to be captured, let's say, but they're also in a situation like this, the resource is what? What is it? It's not that the US isn't trying to control Egyptian resources directly. I mean, what is the resource that benefits the US out of Egypt? What? Money. It's money that the US puts in there, right? So that's one. So it's not, it's not as though Egypt produces cotton today, but it's not, we're not dependent on Egyptian cotton, right? So why all this investment in Egypt? That's the question. Why so much money and investment in Egypt? Okay, subsidizing that, absolutely, but what else? Yes, but what else? Yep.
Personal belief, like not from the book. So
What?
it's a personal belief I have is that
Yeah.
Egypt is the largest military in Arab world and is next to Israel.
Location.
Exactly.
Exactly. So it's a geopolitical, like, why this relationship? I mean, it's huge, right? Egypt is, has been historically the most powerful country politically, economically in the Middle East, and part of that reason is this, and the U.S. sort of cultivates that, right? Egypt established relations with Israel early relative to the other states in the Arab Middle East and Iran eventually. So that was huge. So it matters to have a strong, stable, prosperous Egypt. Of course, and that's what we're facing today. The problem of what do you do, right, Mariam? What do you do with an Egypt that's, there's a popular there's a revolution, basically, an election in which people democratically vote for an Islamist group, right, the Muslim Brotherhood to power. And then what happens? What has happened next since then? Basically a military coup, right? To take back. So you had a military ruler, basically. Then you had a revolution, and then you had a military coup. And the U.S. position, and this is complicated, because on the one hand, there's a lot of emphasis on democracy. Right? We believe in democracy. We believe that people should vote. Shouldn't have military coups left and right. But that's not democracy. At the same time, if people democratically vote for an Islamist state, maybe there are limits to democracy. Or what happens to the sort of economic relation. Right? And that's why there's so much concern about what happens in Egypt. Egypt has become historically sort of linchpin of Middle East policy. Okay, so now this kind of relationship to development, right? The sort of big picture Egyptian situation is shows you how like the money gets funneled, the discourse gets constructed. But now I want to turn a little bit to the question of piped water that I had you read an article of mine, okay? Where let's take, instead of the sort of larger development discourse problem, let's take something that seems on the surface also very natural, more, right? And that sort of goes back to a question that I think we're sort of alluding to here is, well, what do you do in a situation where Egyptians say, well, you know what we want? Now it's been introduced, we like meat, we want to eat meat. What are you going to do? Start taking it away? Does that make sense? Like, how do you handle that, right? So here's a situation. I was like, okay, let's look at something that seems not even meat, but something that becomes the cornerstone of, when we talk about what modernity is, we talk about electricity and running water, piped water. So something basic. Piped water is the entrance into what you imagine a modern life to be, right? Rather than outhouses. Right? So, of course, people aren't going to say, I don't want piped water. We want piped water. And it's the sort of emblem, I think, one of the most important emblems of development. Right? You go to a village, and one of the first things, if it doesn't have piped water, people say, oh, it's this poor village, it doesn't have running water. So water, the distribution of water, piped water, right, is like this core symbol of development in modernity. And so I wanted to look at, okay, let's look at piped water and what happens in a community where people want piped water, but it's also entangled in a whole series of political, social, religious dynamics that are probably unpredictable, or at least that the effects couldn't have been predicted, or, So, if you pretend you can say that it's new, or you can pretend that it's something later. However you want. Or you can say this is a horrible article, it's really boring. I don't want to read anything other than it again. Fine. So what happens, again, in this little town, the edge of the desert, when there's piped water? What are some of the ramifications that refer to? Nobody.
This man, I think he was trying to recapture the well, using wells, and I thought it was surprising because I would want to go back to using a well and have water.
So why do you think this man was interested in this, remaking this well? Yeah. To what? Nostalgia.
Good memory.
Right. So our sense of the old days, right? That in the old days, life was good, life was easy, life was harmonious, life was peaceful. We were traditional. We had these values, and right. So he has running water. He has mechanized pumps, but he goes out of his way to rebuild this whole well. And what else does he do? He rebuilds the well. He has the donkey go up and down and up and down, and he has names for every. I'm writing it down. And what else does he do in addition to that? Yeah. You want to know what it sounded like? It's 90 minutes. But not only did he have that, right? So he I got in the car, he popped it in. And I was like, and not only had he recorded and was listening to it in the car, I had to listen to it, all the way home. But it was amazing. And all his friends, all his buddies who were hanging out at the well too, were also all recording it. So they were all trying to capture, for posterity, because it was all going, right? And the way he described the new well, he said it was like machine gun fire. I don't know if you heard if you hear really high speed sprinklers, right? And so that's what he said. He's like, it's like machine gun fire. But I like this old, on and on for 90 minutes, right? So that to him was like the sound, and clearly the village, that sound, reminded him of the old days. And the point is there's an investment, a social, political, national investment in this nostalgia, right? And he's sort of participating in that too, but he's sort of going beyond the investment, right? So the national investment is put it in museums. So he's not sort of satisfied with just going to a museum, right? He wants to completely embody and capture, or in terms of auditory, in terms of the sort of space of the car, in terms of living it. But he does use the mechanical pump. He did too. So it's not that he stopped, but he had to do it. So what other implications? So we have the question, you introduce piped water, you have this sort of remainder of nostalgia that you have to cope with, or that it doesn't just disappear, right? People remember. But it's not simply, so what are the values? It's sort of community, the idea of hanging out at the water well, the social bonds that he's reproducing with his friends hanging out there. So what are the other sort of angles on the piped water besides that nostalgia? Yeah.
It was the bathroom in the ferry.
Yeah.
Page 7,
Right. So the other angle is also a social one, like the breaking of social bonds through piped water, and that people's trying to cope with the transformation. So it's not just piped water into your house is cleaner. Piped water in your house also reconfigures social relations. So one around the well, or around, and the sounds that sort of permeate a village, right? Your space of home, what a home sounds like. Yeah.
Wasn't there a special word?
Yes.
Is there
Oh yeah. So Magazi. So the well is called a Zaygra. The women's
I'm just curious.
Magazi.
What was it? Which one was the
This
word?
is the well, the Zaygra, and the Magazi is the women's bathing.
Oh, okay.
So right.
Talking to
Yeah, yeah. So these were, I mean, I don't even know, these are like local dialect words. Probably a combination of Swahili and Arabic. So Magazi, these were like, you know, the town has all these canals, right? And then there are these little rooms over the canals with an entrance, right? On the inside, if someone walking by on the outside, people came to the room, right? And women would go there to bathe, right? So the implication for the piped water now coming into the houses, so you're taking, transforms how people experience bathing, the women experience bathing. No longer communally, you know, 3 or 4 people, whoever happens to come in, the women, the bath, but individually in a bathroom, in a shower, turn on the faucet, water comes out, that's your shower. So what happens, right? This young university girl comes back and says, you know, I lived here, my house, she lived here, there's a Magazi right there. So every day, her whole life, she sees this thing. Doesn't question it, doesn't talk about it, but then sees it as far as I know. She goes away to university, first semester, comes back, we're all hanging out here, drinking coffee, eating dates, talking, chit-chatting, and we start talking about this little Magazi, right? And she says, suddenly, it's like, what do you mean? All you women were bathing in this room. That's haram, that's forbidden. You're gonna see each other's bodies, right? So, what is going on in this sort of realization that, or this epiphany on her part, that women should only bathe, they should only see their own bodies, right? Or their children's bodies. What's happening in that moment? What's happening?
Well, I mean, it's just such a generational event. So, you know, the women before, they never thought about it. It's just kind of good. So it's an interesting, such a different perspective.
Oh. So they didn't think that there was any problem, and she never even thought it was a problem until she went to university, right? Yeah.
I feel like it's like a recurring
Yeah.
It's like people when tell me that
Yeah.
people are more convenient together with each other.
Right.
So I guess it's not say quote unquote proper or awkward or whatever.
Right.
But in the city it's different. It's like myself and my kind of mentality.
Exactly.
So I guess coming back,
Yeah, I think she brought that with her. I think she brought that sort of, now she sort of normalized also bathing in the shower. Like that became the norm. And this other way of bathing seemed completely different, even though she had lived, she just didn't sort of process that difference or what it meant, right? And so she had both normalized the process of bathing by herself because I just come into the house, turn on the shower, and bathe by herself, and that's it. So she hadn't even processed that difference. And then on top of that, she had a whole language to talk about how it was improper to bathe with other women. And when the other women are like, you know, everything is haram now, right? These young people, like, won't let us do anything. We can't take showers, we can't even talk, we have to wear this, and it's constant complaint about everything is haram. So just and quickly, I know we have to go, the other issue was the pipe faucet coming, so there was a wall, and my landlord built a kind of broke a hole through the wall to make sure that people had drinking water, right? And he was working under another generational rift, under the presumption that drinking water must be socially available for everyone. You cannot own drinking water. You pay for water time for agriculture and for use in your house for washing, but you do not pay for drinking water. And that this entire new piping system with meters forces you to own drinking water. And he's trying to combat it religiously, right? And with everything, right? Breaking a hole in the wall, saying we cannot own drinking water. That's against Sharia. That's against, and in fact, Sharia is understood to mean the way to not only the path, but the water path, right? The way to water. So to have access to drinking water must be free and available to everyone. Right? But as kids who are forced into an economic situation where you pay for it, obviously feel like it's theirs. And they complain about other people taking it. But of course it's not just other people. It's like these social class, hierarchical caste, racialized differences in the town that they're complaining about. That get stirred up. Okay. All right. So, I know we're going over. Have a very good break. Enjoy the break.